So the banner is not currently in the picture. You can see it.
Right, what do you want to?
You can see it here. Sure, no.
Well, I could put it on the right.
Yeah, just in two. Yeah. I can move it over slightly. Hello, hi, how are you? Pleased to meet you. You're great. Thank you so much. Of course. Loud voice.
Nice to see you again, indeed. Thank you for being
Yes. I've just pressed
Probably didn't
the.
have much choice. But there we
No, I did, but I'm always excited.
So well, it was so nice. I was so actually I was feeling up very well. I better text.
Yeah.
And then you came back so fast. Oh, that was great. Yeah. No, it's true.
I like to get involved with things. I'm always, well, thank you.
excellent.
Right person.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm just going to put it through.
I do. Everyone halfway.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
Just all comes together. My best friend is like an ass.
You just
He didn't sleep very much for that 3 weeks and then that's it's quite the same. Every time I talk about this, he's like,
yeah, I feel like that's a lot of advice that you get for like people who've done things to like
yeah.
No, I think that's fair. Yeah.
do it if you want to.
Yeah.
Don't do it yourself.
Yeah. That's the thing for me.
It's nice to have something new.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it is. It's
good for you.
exciting.
Yeah.
And you said it records?
It records it and gives you the option then to edit it. And then it's saved as your YouTube video. The event.
Don't would otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does.
Like having opinions.
One that's been put on his way.
And then I go to all the references.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you doing that?
So at University of Sheffield.
That's too good about.
Yeah, so the first year is just No, first.
They could just say,
Yeah, that's right. The wild
What
I
was
said,
it?
"Can you see what's like?"
17?
Yeah.
Were you doing your master's?
Yes, master's. Well, I'm doing the doctorate now. But I did the master's at the time. Yeah.
We said that, right? Never said that.
Yeah.
No, it's, I just said the table there.
Someone wants that. I have been.
Oh, no, I think it's, I think it's more, it's on the chair, it's on the chair.
It's so cozy. Yeah. Oh, okay, so yeah. You get a lot of feedback. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that was really nice. Impressive. I was Yukini Kuroki was playing the her festival or her debut.
No, never mind.
Yeah, she was great.
Oh, it is not.
I love the list.
Look at you.
And I didn't hear.
Oh, great.
I got him.
Mister. Yeah.
Because I saw him previously.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably do that. I was in May.
And what year did he
I hope so, but it's a really big project, so it might take a little bit extra, but hopefully not too much. They usually get to like a grace period of about 6 months. Yeah. So we have new campus, basically. So we were always in our minds and trying to remember.
Yes, I've been to 2 years.
Oh, yeah. So that whole building that you were in is new, since like 5-6 years ago. So we're looking there, so because that's a big screen for projector, which is great. Doing like some presentations and stuff. I just want to do a few lecture assignments from my research. And that's really nice. Yeah. Exactly. I think for like some occasions it's maybe a bit too big. It's like 400 seats in there, so it's really, really big. But like, sometimes you don't get like 30 or 40 people there, and then it just feels a little bit too big for us. Yeah. But then some things they do need all the seats for, so we're happy.
It's better to have a big space.
Yeah. There was also a smaller recital hall, which is meant for like the more smaller areas. But that just has a big screen, so you have to use that for presentations.
What's your
That's performance research, where I'm investigating processes of preparing for projects. And I'm performing the 41 pieces of
But that was the name change that year.
Yeah, it's 88, yeah, that was the first one.
So we will start graduation.
Like they're all 5 pieces.
And it's like several, like.
Time-wise, it's not like a great increase, but some of them are pretty hard. Yeah.
Can you get
There's another odor break in it. There's the odd one, yeah. Where it's kind of obvious. Yeah. Now, to be fair, sometimes the performers don't do a good job for them either. Because like they only get them a few months before. So they might expect to get to the semi-final or something, and they do. And then they do the
Baking,
baking for the rest.
and how many large?
About half of them. Yeah, so I'm kind of, no, I'm doing like a series of lectures, like, so I'm doing 6 of those. Lecture recital will focus on like 2 competitions. So like, just bundle of all of them. There are, there's been 12, it's about 3 to 4.
Yeah, I told dolphins every single shot. Has he kind of looked, it looks like the AD.
Well, it's kind of a combination of
Yeah,
early on, beforehand, and then thinking that they're playing there, and back and talk with them.
Yeah.
So that's how
The level one or the like? Are you going to?
I don't think so. It would be my last chance to do it, but I'll probably just fail and never go to try. So I don't think it's. Yeah.
What's your mentor?
Sure. It's a bit of a bummer. But it's so much practice. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Everybody always thinks of what's it there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. If it doesn't pay off, then exactly. Yeah. It's not even minimum wage for how much practice you did. This more because I'm just like put it in a voice and it's like, but and then I kind of just check to see where I should put it. Is it a video? I mean, I have like a script or no? Yeah.
And then later I'm like, oh, I don't really know how this works. Not my experience.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you? Good one, since I saw you.
You're good food.
Oh, there's Jason. I haven't seen Jason for a long time.
Yeah.
The blue. What's one seat? Is it okay? So like whoever is speaking to sit on the other. Or will I sit here and then join in at the end? Yeah, maybe the chair is here. Yeah. Okay, so whoever's speaking. The chair, it's zero stand. Like that.
So maybe this is going to be one person who is speaking.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and you're all very welcome to, for us, what is a very exciting event. Very good. It's a forum on perspectives on piano teaching today. For us, this is our first live stream event, so please be kind to us. We already have a number of people who have joined online, and it would be nice if you send little messages. And during the event this afternoon, the format will be that each speaker will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will have a general discussion. So if you were to for those online, make your comments or questions, present them through the live stream during the presentation, then they can be addressed, or if not, we can possibly come back to them at the end of the event. We have 6 speakers this afternoon. We will take a short break probably after the third one. I'd like to remind everybody, please, just maybe to switch off their mobile phones. I would like to thank also Siobhan Kilkenny for organising a wonderful event. She really brought everything together for us today, and to Fergal Curtis for his technical advice. And really importantly, I would like to welcome our chairperson today, Dr. Mary Lennon, who is going to keep the show on the road. So I think at this stage, as we're running a few minutes behind, I would ask Mary to open the event. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Owen. Good afternoon, everybody. As Owen has said, it's my happy task here today to chair this event. And I think, without further ado, we'll welcome Jimmy Goeijenbier, who will talk about exploring contemporary Irish repertoire in teaching. So a big welcome for Jimmy.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum. And I will, together with you all, be exploring contemporary Irish piano music in teaching. So I'd like to begin by addressing some of the benefits and some of the barriers of including contemporary Irish piano music in teaching and learning. Some of the barriers might include unfamiliar style, unfamiliar musical language. Scores can be quite difficult to read at times. And the use of some contemporary techniques requires the use of a grand piano. However, the benefits might include the possibility of discussing the work with the composer to seek clarification, to become a more all-round musician. And there's the potential for collaboration. And learning and performing Irish repertoire is particularly culturally relevant. So some of these aspects can be seen as unique to contemporary music. However, others might be shared in common with other styles. But is the approach to teaching and learning contemporary music different to other styles? Research by Vesey and Blom, conducted in 2015 in Australia, indicates that the approach to learning what they call stylistically challenging contemporary music may involve establishing an interpretative platform, particularly if the music is in an unfamiliar style. This interpretative platform involves extensive research on the composer's background, listening to other pieces in the composer's output, as well as seeking contact with the composer for insights. And they emphasize that this is often a preparatory stage, which you do before practicing or sight reading the piece. In the process of carrying out my own DMUS research on the processes involved in preparing the 41 commissioned works of the Dublin International Piano Competition for performance, I've identified some similar themes. A similar preparatory stage, which I often read the foreword of the DIPC piano albums, which were published by the Contemporary Music Centre, to see a little bit about the piece and the composer. I often frequent the CMC website. They have a great resource for details about composers, and it gives me a chance to look at their output. This way I can find out what kind of instruments they tend to write for, and it's particularly useful for me to look at other pieces that they were writing at the time of the piece that I'm studying. In some of the more challenging repertoire of this group of repertoire, and some of the more challenging pieces, I have noticed that there is a slightly different approach to my learning of them. It is often section by section for some of the very challenging ones, which is a different approach than what I have with difficult music in other genres. This is often because it's just too difficult to deal with the whole piece. Now, this is in the context of a 5-minute long contemporary piece. There is often a very highly deliberate factor to the practice, which I have to emphasize is not necessarily unique to contemporary music. However, I found that it can't be done otherwise. And this may be due to the fact that there's initially, in my experience, in some of the very challenging pieces, less reliance and help from muscle memory. I would like to highlight some resources for finding contemporary Irish repertoire. I've handed out some sheets there with some information on it. I'm happy for those online to maybe provide that on PDF file at some point. So finding repertoire. There are over 1,000 solo piano pieces on the Contemporary Music website written by Irish composers. This is a tremendous resource and we're very lucky to have it. Also from the Dublin International Piano Competition commission pieces, as I mentioned, there are 41 pieces in total, which can also be found on the Contemporary Music website. In addition to this, the Royal Irish Academy of Music exam syllabi often include repertoire by Irish composers. So just to keep within my allotted time, with so much repertoire and so many resources available, I'd like to raise for debate the topic of what can be done to promote engagement with contemporary Irish repertoire in teaching and learning.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. So, have we any questions? Who would like to respond to Jimmy's question or to anything that Jimmy said, or anything else that you'd like to say about teaching contemporary Irish music?
I actually had a student recently I had given her a piece for her junior cert practical, and they had to write a little something about it. And she emailed, because there was nothing online about the piece or the composer really, she emailed the composer herself and got all of this kind of insight into the piece. It really connected her with the piece actually a lot more. So just when you mentioned about that, I thought, I don't think I'd realised how valuable that would be until that had actually happened.
So just for those online, Maria in the audience has just said that one of her students recently was doing a piece by an Irish composer for junior cert. She needed to write a little bit about it, couldn't find anything, and contacted the composer and benefited greatly and was inspired probably along the way.
Definitely, yeah.
Thanks, Maria.
I think this touches on an important issue in that there aren't always recordings available of the repertoire, which may pose as a barrier for some to find the repertoire, to be exposed to it, and then to develop the desire to want to learn and engage with the music.
Yes, I see both of these comments as very, very important, because I remember when I did the EPTA competition and I had to play a contemporary work. That was the first time that I explored the CMC website. I mean, I would have been, I don't know, maybe 14 or 15 years old. And so maybe, of course, that was less of a digital time, because I'm 26 now, so it would have been about 12 years ago. But I remember looking at the website on my own, and I chose a piece that there was a recording of on the website. And I had stayed clear of the ones that didn't have a recording, because how would I know if I liked it? And maybe, I don't know if the IPC does this, but whether there are recordings of all all these commissioned pieces, that would be a huge asset to having this archive so that people could. But I don't know if that
It's funny you mentioned it, because research involves the performance.
So I wondered, are you going to, is it so that you can build an archive of?
Yes, so to address that, my research does involve the performance of all of those pieces, and it includes also the recording of them all.
Right.
So at some point you can stay tuned for that resource to become available. But there are many recordings in the CMC library already, in which you can email them and you can book an appointment, and they have recordings of almost all of them already, but they're just not by one performer, which is also maybe a good thing.
Yes.
So I'll come in there and just say hats off to EPTA for promoting contemporary Irish music in the festival. Also, there's graded repertoire available as well, Jimmy, isn't there? You know, for younger students in CMC. I think it was Ray Keary did some work on that a while ago. So that's also there. Any more questions or anything from our people online?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Okay. Anything else here?
Julie, do you have any ideas about how to promote? Because we discovered in the festival this year, and maybe last year, we had no entries for the contemporary music competitions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a massive shame, particularly because there's prize money involved, I believe, for the contemporary. So that's an incentive, I think, to get people to do it. From my perspective, I think we do have a responsibility as teachers to include contemporary music in the learning environment of our students. And I think that we should strive to do that from an early age, if possible. And the graded repertoire, as Mary was referring to, is kind of a useful resource for that. And there are actually many, many accessible pieces by Irish composers out there. So I think it has to start, I suppose, with our own teaching practice that we do included, and then that hopefully will incentivize through the performance of these pieces other students to take that up as well.
Do you think I've noticed in more recent years the Royal Irish Academy are including a lot more contemporary stuff in their syllabus, which is great. And this year particularly, there's a piece on the grade 5. It's by John McLaughlin. And when I listened through the pieces, I thought, I wonder, will they choose this? Because I let them listen to everything and choose what they like. And all of them chose that piece. And like rhythmically, it's quite complex. The harmonies are quite unusual. And I wonder, what do you think about us as teachers if we're not confident with particular styles? Are we not presenting them as strongly, or are we putting our own taste basically into our practice? Like, I wonder, do you have any thoughts about if that's why potentially?
Yeah, I think that might be one of the barriers to it, that unfamiliar language, unfamiliar style. And from my own experience with contemporary music, it is that aspect of rhythm and pulse that is actually the more challenging part, rather than anything being particularly striking or different tonally or harmonically. What I might suggest is that we include it in our own practice as well, where we can. And it might require us to study these pieces before we think about bringing them up to our students. You know, we have to maybe understand ourselves first. What are the challenges of this piece? Does it suit the skill set of our student? And will it show off their best qualities and improve what we want to improve? So I think that's an important step to take, perhaps before playing it or before letting them hear a recording of it.
Mm-hmm. I might just pop in and say, in my experience, kids love the contemporary music.
Yeah.
They don't know there's a barrier.
No.
Because they're open at that stage,
Yeah, I agree.
And we're lucky in that there's a lot of very attractive and accessible stuff.
Yeah, no, I think teachers really have to be very careful, because obviously we are showing our students what is available, and often we say, well, there's such a rich repertoire of piano music without ever going near contemporary music at all. And so I think we just need to be careful. It's up to us to remember that.
Yeah.
Very much so. The challenges vary hugely. I mean, often contemporary music can be really difficult to learn, as you were saying. I mean, the learning process is different because it can be very awkward at times, but that tends to be the more advanced repertoire. And as you say, the music for the younger players tends to be really very well written with that in mind. So no, it's up to us. I think there's no doubt about that as teachers.
And it's probably up to us to promote the EPTA Contemporary Music Competition in next year's festival.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jimmy. And next we have Maria Greenan, and Maria is going to talk about memorization. Teaching memorization, a skill in its right, and recognizing its potential in the development of musicality and confidence.
I feel like I'm on the news. Okay, so how many times have we had a student bounce into a lesson and say, I don't need the music for this piece anymore. I know it off by heart. It seems to make them really proud and something that they like to show off. As someone who has always played from memory from the outset due to a visual impairment, I have developed an effective and efficient memorization strategy which has been honed over the years as repertoire has become more complex and lengthy. During COVID, when all of my teaching was online, I found myself wondering about a few of my students and whether I knew them musically. Had they any connection to the music they were playing, or was it a simply following instructions exercise? So I decided to remove the score from the equation to try and see if I could create a direct connection between the student and the music using my own memorization strategy. Amazingly, the response from the students was extremely positive. They appeared to have a whole new approach to practice and certainly seemed like they had a greater sense of confidence and achievement. This poses the question, should we as piano teachers treat memorization as a skill in its own right, in a similar way that we do with sight reading, technical skills, or oral skills? When incorporated, all of the above lend themselves well in devising a solid memorization strategy. In fact, I have found that students have developed a deeper musical understanding as these skills have been used in context during the memorization process. Today, I will talk about some of the cornerstones for reliable memorization and offer some possible strategies and pointers that you might like to use with your own students. Studies show that the most effective memory is achieved by information being encoded under various categories: aural, visual, kinesthetic, which we know as motor memory, and cognitive. To truly be able to know something from memory, it is suggested that all of these styles must be in play for the most effective results. To put this into context, how many of you can remember phone numbers from 25 years ago? Everyone's like, yeah. This is probably because you were physically punching the number in, which is the kinesthetic. You were visually seeing the number being punched in, which is the visual. There were dial tones, sometimes a rhythmic aspect in your mind of the number itself. And you probably had to actually cognitively remember the number. Nowadays, you may call someone several times a week and the number does appear on your phone. However, it's unlikely that you know that number because only one memory style is in play. I think we can all agree that often students, particularly younger or earlier players, play things from memory, relying mostly on motor memory, which on its own has been proven to be unreliable in high-pressure situations like performing. If my student says to me, I know this off by heart, and I say to them, great, play me bar 3. They will most likely say, I can only play it from the beginning. So what are some ways we can teach a more solid memory? Firstly, it is important to remember that memory is a muscle, or should be treated as such. The more you memorize, the better your memory will become. Secondly, I feel that the goal of this process is to teach students to eventually develop the skills to be able to memorize in a reliable way independently. And thirdly, this is a great opportunity to incorporate some music theory, sight reading, and oral skills into your lessons and use them in real music, with real music in context. I recommend that the memorization process starts from the outset of learning a piece. This reduces the chances of a student relying on motor memory solely and encourages them to be more active and engaged in the process. Take very short sections, possibly even bars, hand separately of course. Take the time to talk through pitches, analyze patterns, make connections with scales, intervals between notes, and make connections with things that are already familiar to the students, possibly triads or arpeggios. Clap rhythms and sing melodies, constantly turning the page over and testing all the different stages. So you might test their memory of the rhythm, you might test their memory of the pitches even, ask them to recall the names. Then incorporate the motor aspect last. After a few goes, turn the page over and check if the information has gone in correctly. Continue this process and you will be surprised at how quickly and confidently students will learn things from memory. You might like to try things like asking them to write particular bars or sections out on manuscript paper. That is time consuming. Or play random bars to test their knowing. Ironically, I still find my students running up to that point in their heads, fingers dancing on their laps, maybe humming quietly. Either way, it seems to be an enjoyable challenge and certainly seems to engage them much more closely with their music. You may also find that due to a deeper learning process, repertoire will be learned in a more accurate and purposeful way. It is definitely a slower process in the beginning, but this could be probably said from the learning of most skills. It could be argued that this practice of analysis, no matter how basic, can help with other tasks like sight reading as well. The practice of looking through a score before playing it, spotting patterns and familiar shapes, can only be beneficial for the further development of their musical understanding. As pianists, it is a tradition that we perform from memory. Encouraging an active rather than passive memorization of repertoire can only benefit students to play with more confidence, potentially more musicality, and with the right approach could certainly help them develop a more meaningful musical experience.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's very shaky. Lots there to talk about. So, has anybody any questions or comments for Maria?
Well, I find from teaching that the students usually learn the melody easily, but the complement and the harmony is always the is there anything that you would advise? Is there any
For them to learn outside of the melody?
Yeah, exactly. Just the complements, the harmony.
I actually teach that first usually. Okay. So if I have, say, a kind of an earlier a student that's a little bit younger, say grade 2 or under maybe, I usually, because there tends to be a little bit of a resistance to the less interesting parts to them, so I tend to start there. And the nice thing about that is once they know the accompaniment or the harmonies, I will have been playing the melody all along with that as they've learnt it. So they've hourly started to take in the melody, and then they do tend to learn the melody really quickly. Yeah. So I usually start with that part. Okay. Yeah.
And do they understand the harmony, or is it just like
depending where they're at with it, but I tend to try and use that to teach harmony. So if there was something, say using a chord of C and then maybe F in second version, that type of shape, we'll look at the shape first, but I'll kind of take the opportunity to explain the relationship between those. So it's just to try and incorporate. If they don't already know it, it's an opportunity to teach it, I think. It's just time consuming. Yeah. So you can choose your moments. I don't think you have to do that with everything. And if it's like complex harmony, you don't necessarily have to do it that way. It depends kind of what their level is, I think.
I think as a rule, students tend not to think of theory when they're playing the piano.
No, it's totally separate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just, they can't resist just playing keys, pressing keys, but actually understanding what they're playing. I think that is the real challenge. And as you say, I would often encourage part of the lesson at least to be, away from the piano, something like that, particularly for the ones that are more advanced, who know the stuff, but just aren't applying it, and get them to actually work it out. Because most of the time they can, with encouragement, and it does help, but of course they don't have to do it.
No. Whereas if you use that information to help them learn it, it's then actually they're using it as a tool instead of having to learn it as an after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they can add it to the toolkit as such.
Exactly, yeah. So what makes this easier to remember, essentially, rather than afterwards having to analyze something they already know? They're probably going to resist that, yeah, a little bit.
Muscular memory seems to be the one they all fall back on. And of course, as soon as they come to the lesson, first thing they say is, well, it went so well at home.
I could play this perfectly
Yes,
at home.
yes. And it's hard to understand why.
Yeah. I think even advanced pianists, though, often rely, I would say, quite heavily on motor memory. When I first started looking into this, I asked kind of my peers how they got to the point from playing from a score to performing from memory. And a lot of them said, it just happens. It just happens. And obviously there is a more purposeful memory happening at that level, but it isn't a kind of thing that, it didn't seem to be a thing that people would sit down and purposely and methodically memorize. So that motor aspect, and then there's a fear in performance then of forgetting.
Absolutely.
Which...
I think memory tends to be a lot of the time based on repetition, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's the idea. If you kind of start the process before that has happened, before the motor memory has kicked in, it tends, I think your mind can kind of, there's better connections, so it has a closer connection with the information, I think.
That's something I was going to comment. I love the way, because it helps the student make those connections. And the way you presented it was very holistic.
Yeah.
You know, and it would kind of combine musicianship and piano.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
you
it's
presented
fun.
it very clearly, actually.
Oh, thank you.
Very clear.
It's fun too. I think they like the challenge of, can you remember this, you know?
I love the way you say, they said, I know it from memory, you said, play bar 3.
Yeah, you don't know it. You can play it from the beginning.
It's not fair.
No one can do that.
Do we have any more questions or comments or experiences or?
I think theory is very important, but like if you were to break it down to a percentage, I have 100% of students that get music lessons, piano lessons, and any kind of instrument lessons. I see 10% do theory on the side. They go to actual theory lessons. So you really are tasked with 2 jobs. You're not just teaching piano, you're teaching theory as well. It's kind of rely on the student not just pick up stuff, but remember what you're telling them. You have to write it down and copy it. It's a very, like when I suggest theory classes, to either a parent or a student, you know, there's this kind of partial resistance because they just want to play, you know, they just want to play what they see. So I have been trying to recommend to more students to take theory lessons as well, but it's not hugely, you know, encouraged, and also you do end up having to do 2 jobs in that regard.
For those online, our speaker was towards the back, so you may not have been able to hear. The point that was being made was that the piano teacher has 2 jobs to do in terms of teaching piano and teaching theory, and that sometimes people are averse to taking a theory class. But I think what Maria would be saying is you can do the 2 together. It may take a little bit more time, but...
Yeah, and I totally understand what you're saying, and I think that's probably why I've tried to be really consciously include that in the memorization process, because then I don't need to save 5 minutes to do theory at the end. It's all kind of incorporated, and it is more meaningful as well because they're applying it to the real music rather than it be, I don't want to do theory. They're actually doing it all the time, ideally, but it's definitely, you have to think a lot on the spot. And like, as you say, are they picking it up? Are they not? But if they learn enough repertoire and they learn it and they're connecting it to theory all the time, they will just understand it. You don't have to put extra time aside unless they want to do a theory exam or something, which is a totally other kettle of fish.
So towards more efficient piano teaching. Okay, thank you very much, Maria.
Hungarian, Russian, Irish perspective on the importance of teaching technique for optimal learning and performance experience for both hobby pianists and those learning piano seriously. Thank you, Ella. I leave the table to you.
Thank you very much. So where the Hungarian, Irish, Russian thing for me sprang from was I started piano in Hungary at the age of 5 with a teacher who was Russian trained. She did her, I believe, master's and doctorate in St. Petersburg, I think, and or Moscow more probably. And she was the classic Russian teacher, very tough. She was very supportive. I had about 3 lessons a week, so it was very intense. But there were threats like, if you play a wrong note again, I'll send you home. And she got the job done because I was very studious. And on what Maria was just speaking about, I was thinking the theory part, I think, very much depends, but it's a great help if the parents are involved and they're on board, because my mom didn't have any previous music education, but with me, she always sat and practiced because that was an order from my piano teacher. Other orders were I had to take a nap before lessons, so I could never have a lesson without a nap because I had to be very alert. And she was very strong on technique from the very first day, and things that I really understand now as an adult. And I'd like to speak about a few things that she had taught me and that I incorporate in my teaching right now. And also in my own playing, I noticed why she was speaking about these things. So for example, in Hungary, it's very common to have a footstool at the pedals because we're so small. None of the teachers wanted the legs to be dangling because then you can balance yourself better, of course. And I don't see that in Ireland, actually. I don't know why. I don't know if it actually helps. I do think it helps if everyone is grounded. I always say to my students, put your heels on the ground and be grounded. And I always get them to stand up. Can you stand up without shuffling? So if they can stand up like this, then it means that their heels are fully supporting them from the ground. And I see that the students who I've taken on from other teachers who haven't been taught the importance of being grounded and having proper posture, it takes a very long time for them to understand why I keep going on about it. But after a while, they just look so much better and they have so much more control on the keyboard and they can do scales so much faster and clearer because they have the proper posture. So that's one thing I took away from these very early piano lessons. Another thing is she used to put out her hand like this, and I'd have to put my hand this way onto her fingers, and she'd shake my hand and she'd bring it around. And if any of my fingers slipped off, it would be because my fingertips aren't strong enough. And the way she did this to shake the hand is so that the actual arm, the weight of the arm is very loose, but it's heavy. I suppose the arm should be heavy, but the fingertips should be the strongest and the wrist to be very free. And so I do that with my younger students and also with the adults. It's always a fun few seconds because they don't really understand why am I sticking out my hand and they start shaking it. But I like to do these small things. I think it also builds a nice rapport with the students, because usually we sit so far away from each other, and this is, of course, I wouldn't do this maybe with teenage boys. I think that can be a sensitive, part of their life. They're very awkward and they try to sit away from me as far as possible. So that's another thing. I remember she was always talking about a round hand, and what I say to my students now is imagine you're holding an egg. And if you squeeze the egg, of course, too hard, it's going to either fall or it's going to break. With the little ones, I show them a video of lots of cute dogs. You give them an egg and they have an instinct. not to bite onto the empty heart. It's an amazing, I don't know why they have this evolutionary thing, but so that's something to, bring the point across. So that's something I would say to them, to have the egg there, or sometimes I would put an eraser, a rubber, into their hand while they're playing. And then if they don't let it go, then they're doing it correctly. I say it's like picking up something, or like, it's like I always say, these are French fries and these are curly fries, or onion fries, or anything that is a round shape. So I think that is so important, because then they understand why their scales there are really even. And I always speak about the importance of scales, and they then understand. I pointed out on the score, look at that, that's an A major scale. Wow, it's so much easier then for them to break down the piece, because it feels so natural on the hand, because they have the proper technique. And I noticed this with my adult students who would have had lessons when they were very young, and they did have good technique built in. They excel at playing now. They may have not played piano for 40 years now. They come back. It's just so much easier for them to play piano for fun. And I always say to my students, I don't expect you to become a pianist, but it would be, I think, a lovely hobby for you as a lawyer, and you're 40 years old, and then you can play for fun. And it should be something that is easy to do. Something I would like to speak about in the middle of my journey. So I had a very strong technique crazed teacher, and then when I came to Ireland, the kind of focus of my first few years was learning English. So I didn't have a crazy focus on playing piano. So I actually lost a lot of the technique that was taught to me. And also it was during those years where I wasn't aware of why this is important. So it took me a very long time to relearn the important sitting right and not having tension. So just quickly on injuries, I wanted to say, because I think technique is such a broad subject. It goes on for so many aspects of piano playing, but for me personally, injury is something I take very seriously. And I noticed that because I wasn't aware of tension in my body, I would ignore things that went wrong. And it took a physiotherapist for me to drive it home that injury is not actually that serious. It's of course it is if it's left untreated, but it's just a muscle tension. And none of my teachers could understand that. They when I said, I feel a pain in my finger, they thought it was the end of the world. And then I realized, if I feel any pain, I need to stop for a few days, ice it, exercise, take ibuprofen, and then that was, and then it will be fine after a few days. But it took a very long time for me to understand, and so I'm so passionate about teaching technique. And of course, I don't know everything, don't know all the answers, but that's pretty much what I wanted to speak about.
And those of you who have heard Ella play will know that her scales are, as she wants her pupils to be, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. That raises lots of issues. So, audience, questions, comments. And people online, please don't be afraid to pop a question or a comment into the chat box. Yeah. We'd love to hear from you.
I think that...
Sure.
And how long were you expected to practice as a young child?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I've been asking my mom. She doesn't really remember. I think what it was is my teacher told my mom exactly what needs to be done. And my mom, there was a copybook, and my mom followed it. So I think it was something like, do this 20 times, or do this until it sounds like this. And I think my mom would have been in the lessons, not through the whole lesson, but I'm pretty sure my teacher would have showed her this is how I would like it to sound. And my mom did not take me back to the lesson unless it was done. So I feel so grateful for the parents who are involved with my students' music journey, because it's so much more than the 30-minute lessons. And teachers who so I one of the teachers told me a few years ago in the academy here, she said, I never give out the student, I always give out to the parent. And I realized that's so true, because how can you give out to an 8-year-old girl who's doing 5 activities during the week and doesn't have her homework done? It is up to the parent to sit down and get the work done.
Thanks, Sharon.
It's a huge
Owen?
responsibility.
It's
isn't it,
huge.
for parents?
It's
Oh my
huge. On
goodness.
top of working, and usually people
Yeah.
here, both mom and dad work full time. It's
Yeah.
very difficult. But then it makes my job so much more difficult.
course.
And also, I always want my students to enjoy learning. And if it's always a struggle, and I always have to give out to them in the lesson, which I don't. I'm not a horrible teacher. But you know, I can see how much the students excel whose parents are involved.
Yes. Not all parents want to be involved.
Yes, yes,
Challenge.
yes,
Unfortunately, it's child handling.
yes,
But I think what's wonderful there is the fact that there was more than one class a week. 3 classes a week. I mean, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
As a small child, in particular. So that's really wonderful.
Do you have more than one class a week?
with my teacher?
Yeah, with
Yes.
your students.
With my students, some of them I do, yes. Some of the parents who understand, yeah, they do ask for more. But it's very difficult to fit it in. I do understand that Hungary is a socialist country, well, not now, but ex-socialist. And so there are a lot of these public school system remnants of, you go to the public state music school, and it's a very different way of teaching. Here, I'm also focused on making money. For me, this is a way to pay bills. So I also have the 30-minute lesson, and I have 40 students a week. So it is a difference.
It is very different because it's, for parents, the bottom line matters. Not only fitting it into their very busy schedules, the children's schedules, but paying for a second class.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it's a big struggle. Yeah.
Do you ever find that they just don't do it?
They don't do the practice.
No, the technique stuff. I find like sometimes you can, and it's linked again to that work being done at home. It's also, I think, linked a bit to intention. Like what's the intention of kind of the long term? So like I have a few students where the parents, they have this kind of attitude of like, I just don't want any pressure on them. I don't want them to do any exams, and that's all fine. But as a result of that kind of attitude is on the kids a little bit. And so like technique isn't that important to them, or not that they're resistant, but there isn't kind of a hunger to improve in the same way. It's nearly like for fun. And of course, like it is fun and enjoyable, but for me, I struggle with that, I think, where, we want to be moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm not a babysitter.
Yes.
No.
I do find that over time, they do drop the bad habits bit by bit. There are, of course, students who, everyone is built differently. Of course, there are some students just have such a habit of protecting themselves. It's very difficult for them to open up and drop the shoulders. So I think it is tied to personality as well. But I would say most of the time, I am lucky I have recurring students. So I would have them for years and years and years. And they do drop the bad habits because I keep going on about it. But I always say very simple things to them. Like what I do is, can I do something? Oh yeah, this thing, I do with them a lot, and they don't understand. That finger is not strong enough. They snip it off. And they say, oh, and that's too strong. And that's so effective because you can feel the fingertip.
Yeah, you
Being
can
strong.
actually, yes.
And I can swing you around because you're nice and free.
Oh.
And then I do, and then I show something on your arm. So I demonstrate how it should feel if they're playing double thirds or something. I say, let these go. These should be nice and soft and just ignore them. These fingers that you need, they need to be very firm. And then can you do this for me? And then, no, that's not strong enough. And then they understand how it should feel. And I'm not saying I have 100% success, but yeah, I do feel like it does through time stick on them. Yeah.
Yeah, just one last thing there, you know, about the fun bit. I always feel it's more fun if you're able to do it. And if you're doing it, if you have a good technique, then you'll be able to do it better and you'll be able to play better. So it's actually more fun.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a nice note to stop on there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ella. And we're going to have a little break.
Just one comment here
Oh,
from
sorry.
online. Yeah, from Billy O'Brien. He just said about what you've just been saying. He found it interesting that you said you had 3 lessons a week as a young learner. He says he thinks consistency and frequency is probably more effective than length of practice time when teaching young students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's what my teacher had in mind. That's why I don't remember how long I practiced for. That's why my mom, I think, doesn't remember. Because it was in the lessons. Also, lessons were 45 minutes long. So it was a lot of learning in the lesson. And I remember my teacher said to my mom, I want the correct things being done. So that's why I had so many lessons in a row, so that I didn't pick up bad habits. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have a short break now, about 5 minutes, is it? 5 to 10 minutes. And we'll welcome you back, the people online, in that time for more interesting perspectives on piano teaching today.
Thank you. So passionate about this. Oh, it was like imagine camping in Wicklow town. And I am very lucky because I'm like a is a very it was I was an outside, but a very yeah, it is a one.
There's a different type. When you speak about technical, yes. And actually pay as an issue. Oh no. But as well, the other problem with that is that you've got people who finish their grade. So I'm listening out.
I'm excusing myself. You can come up and we'll let the say, so you can be in situ. Okay? I have to walk and I can do the open. So I could actually stand over here. Just
That's with Megan O'Neill.
If anybody else would prefer to stand and sit, that's fine too, when you're presenting. Are we back? Yeah. So, welcome back everybody. And our next presenter is Kim Shepherd, who will speak on challenges of teaching beginners at different ages. So, welcome for Kim.
Thanks, Mary. So as Mary said, I'll be discussing some of the challenges of teaching beginner piano students at different ages. All of the points that I'm going to mention are all taken from my own experiences teaching, and from the point of view that the student has no prior musical knowledge or experience, so completely from scratch. So the first age group that I'm going to mention is the very young beginner, so kind of ages 4 to maybe 6 or 7. And worth noting, all the age groups can be somewhat interchangeable, and these are just brief kind of guides I've gone with for today. So one of the biggest challenges with this age group is managing their attention levels and maintaining their focus and attention while still keeping the lesson fun and enjoyable and not too kind of serious and work heavy. Another challenge that recently I've started to observe a lot more is that oftentimes these students don't know their alphabet, don't know numbers, can't necessarily count. And I'm finding that more so in recent years. So they find it quite difficult to learn those new concepts alongside learning kind of the new skills of piano in general. So that's kind of something just to be aware of. And the last point for this age group, which will slightly tie into the previous one, is that it can be difficult sometimes to manage the child's progress. So if they're going through a method book and they're understanding all the concepts, they can maybe read notes, they can find the keys, but technically they're not able to play the things that they want to play, kind of know how, they can reach a bit of a block. It could also happen the other way, where technically they're able to use their fingers and kind of have no real issues with navigating that, but can't find A on the piano, and trying to let those two things develop in sync with each other, so as the child doesn't reach like a brick wall, whilst also not holding them back at the same time and allowing them to still progress. So that is the young beginner. Next is our average age beginner, so 7 or 8 to kind of 10 years old. Typically with this age group, I find that most of the difficulties or challenges are more related to the student as an individual. So they might have difficulties reading, maybe they struggle with pulse, concentration, they might have a lack of motivation, a lack of parental support, which we'll hear from Jason later, or they might not have a good quality instrument at home, which could also be an issue. So I feel like for this age group, I've noticed less trends to do with their age, more so that as a teacher, being ready for any situation that could come up or any difficulties that they might face is the main kind of thing I would say with that age group. Then on to preteens, so 11 to 14. All of the 3 points I have for this group are sort of connected, so at the end it'll make a bit more sense. The first thing with this age group to highlight and be aware of is that they're starting to become more self-conscious, more self-aware, starting to compare and judge themselves with their peers. So that will lead into the next kind of points to do with the materials and kind of what they're learning. I personally have found that there's not an awful lot of materials that are suited for this age group. I have found some that I didn't have any of this age group this year, so there's some kind of books that I'd like to try out that I haven't had a chance to use yet, but a lot of kind of method books for a beginner at this age still just has some nursery rhymes in it or little tunes like that they usually don't want to learn, or they think is kind of babyish, or if something comes off too easy, they also don't really want to learn it. So it can be kind of challenging to find materials that are appropriate for their age and that they kind of can relate to. And the last point that I'll mention for this age group is that often it can be a challenge to try to figure out why they're learning piano. If you ask a 12-year-old, oh, why did you decide to learn piano? Oh, I don't know. I'm not really sure. It was kind of cool. Is there any songs you want to learn? A pop song? Do you like classical music? Oh, I don't know. Just anything. So it can be really hard to figure out what do they want to learn, why they want to learn, even though they do probably know the answer, they just maybe don't want to tell you or can't figure out how to tell you what it is. So kind of linking all those points together, I'd say the challenge would be making sure that everything is kind of age appropriate. Things sound kind of more mature and not like super easy for them, so that you can keep them encouraged and motivate them to keep on learning. And then the last kind of category is an older teenager into adults. So you could break that down further, but for today, that's just a blanket age group. The first kind of challenge I noticed with this group is that their patience. Often they understand, unlike a younger student, that we have to learn point A, we have to learn point B to get to C. They sometimes still find that very frustrating and don't want to go through all the steps. So managing that and explaining why we're learning such and such to get to where they want to be, so that they don't get too frustrated and think I should be able to play this tomorrow, and that they don't lose patience in that process. And the second point is sort of similar to one that I mentioned with the younger students earlier, that they can also get to the point where they, maybe if they're reading music, they can read everything on the page, their hands can't keep up with the music, especially if they're an older student. So trying to pace the progress so that they're developing physically, technically, that they will be able to play the things that they want to play. And the last point, which is something that I have found challenging with older adults, being able to, or trying to find materials, or create materials or exercises to reinforce some of the basic concepts. A lot of the time, they don't want to revise the note names, or they don't really want to revise 2 black keys versus 3 black keys, which are obviously really important. So trying to create different exercises that they're getting all the reinforcement of those basic concepts without feeling, the motivation, not feeling encouraged to keep going. So there are some of the challenges. I'm sure you all have more that you could say and add, but they're just some that I thought would be interesting to highlight.
Thank you very much, Kim. Lots of thoughtful reflection there.
Yeah.
And some very interesting questions raised. So, any response from our audience? Ella.
I find adult beginning teaching really difficult, exactly for the reasons you're saying. I don't want to infantilize them and make them, play these nursery rhymes.
Yeah.
Have you found any books that are, or any, because I really like the page-to-page kind of, then they feel like one page after the other. But I find it incredibly difficult to find a lot of materials.
Yeah, I think the one that I found the most success with would be the Piano Adventures for adults. Adult Piano Adventures, I think is how it's worded. It's quite a big book, and it goes very methodically through. It's got lots of exercises in it as well. It's got little theory pages, and it's got a 3-minute technique reinforcement activity, and then it has some songs that they'd be familiar with, which I find they quite enjoy when we're learning. Someone learned Happy Birthday the other day, like a 60-year-old student I have, and he had great fun learning Happy Birthday. So it's got a few that they will know of, and then some kind of other ones in there, but most are familiar, so they can know what they're trying to play. But yeah, other than that book, I don't have many others.
I have one adult who I will not name. You're on the stream right now. But he's learned his every good boy deserves fire and all that. He's able to read the notes incredibly fast, blank. It's just his actual coordination is, it's like watching a person roll down a hill. He just has no orientation. So he does get quite frustrated in that regard. So I'm a little teapot turned into, I'm a broken teapot and stuff like that. So he ends up laughing, but I think he's forcing laughter to a certain degree. I'm trying not to laugh because I said it's F. It's F. I'm pointing to F, and we write all the notes in, and it's, at what point should, you totally change tack and try something different, and what would that different thing be?
I would try the memorization there. Take the score away.
Yeah. For those online, Maria, who presented on memorization, has answered the question, saying memorization, take the score away and get them to focus on the technical aspect.
Yeah.
Kim, what would your...
I agree with Maria. Or even learning some kind of rote pieces that still sound like music, that don't sound like too childish or anything. And I think with the much older students that I do have, we tend to do a lot of repetition, and he's very happy to stay on the same pieces until they're perfect. But that can also then, when is it perfect? When is it time to move on? That adds another question in as well.
We might need to bring Ella in to sort out their technique, because the problem I think a lot of the time is just the intellectual capacity is so highly developed, and the kinesthetic or the physical is less supple and less so than the young student, because things are more set at that point in time.
I'm just thinking maybe something like improvisation perhaps would help even. Something very simple, it could be a very simple improvisation idea. It might just be something to try.
Yeah. Do you think your student would?
If you just have a simple little bass and try to kind of make something.
I call that cheating, and I've let him cheat, but then he kind of says, no, I have to do it properly. He's very hard on himself in that regard. That's where the wall really does start to.
But just tell him that the technical thing will come.
Yeah.
But is the problem only the reading notes?
It's purely physical. I think it's just purely.
But does it involve reading?
Reading, yeah. Full reading. His reading is very good. It's just, there's only so many times you can tell him it's F, third crotchet, that bar, and.
Maybe you need to emphasize the technique more and some exercises and little studies and things, that involve the repetition that Kim is talking about as well.
What's nice with adults? I often do that kind of, like a blues, kind of simple sort of blues bass. Because it's obviously set kind of 12 bars. And I feel like they get a lot from that, and it's the same every time. And it doesn't sound too easy, and they can kind of memorize it. There's a bit of structure to it. Just something that they can practice even without taking out any sheet music. Something like that, maybe.
Can I say, I found this piece, it's Passacaglia by Handela Halvorsen, but it's a transcription, I can't remember who. But I find that piece really good to give to a little bit more advanced students, so not complete beginners, but they are beginning to learn, because it just goes something like A minor, D minor, F major, C major kind of bass, and the Passacaglia, of course, is that it's the same bass material for the entire piece. And then the right arm is just doing C, C, B, B, A, A, G, G octaves. And when they get that bass line progression, it sounds so lovely. It's such an expressive piece, but it's quite doable for them because it's just moving the hand 4 times.
Yeah, it's probably a matter of finding the right piece for this person.
There's just a suggestion here from Barbara Dyke for adult beginners, on the topic of the adult beginner books. She suggests Carol Barrett's classic piano course, or the series by Ken Baker, The Complete Piano Player. Both have good repertoire, she says, for adults,
Great.
that they're likely to know already also, yeah.
Thank you, Barbara.
So that's Carol.
Carol Barrett, classic piano course.
I had a quick question about the 11 to 14 age group. I thought you raised very interesting questions there. You said the challenge to figure out is why are they learning and what do they want to learn?
Yeah.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, at the age of 11 to 14-ish, typically they've raised the idea to start piano lessons, unlike maybe a younger child where the parents have said, oh, let's try piano, maybe you'd like it. Usually they've either seen someone perform or maybe their friends perform, but there's some reason that they wanted to start in the first place, which often can affect the type of things that they want to be learning. Sometimes they will be really interested in classical music, want to go down maybe an exam to kind of go down that standard, typical route, so to speak. A lot of the time, they might just want to learn like the pop songs they hear on the radio or things like that. And if they don't learn those things, then they're like, oh, I don't want to play piano, I don't want to play piano. So trying to actually figure out like what the goals are that they want to achieve can be a bit tricky sometimes.
Anybody else like to come in on that or anything else?
I think like that age group, they tend to not, I totally agree with what you said about not wanting to play things that are too easy.
Mm-hmm.
Like older beginners than that, like later teens seem to be more open to the process.
Yeah.
Whereas that age group, you'll show them something and they want to do it as quick as possible. So it's just that thing of like being able to choose things that kind of satisfy that sort of sense of achievement.
Yeah.
Without skipping any steps, as you were saying. That's definitely, it's easier if you can get them a couple of years before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely probably the trickiest beginner age, I think, around that time.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I liked the way in your average age one that you emphasized the individualized approach.
Yeah.
You know, that some will have reading issues or motivational, or you can't really predict really.
No, they're all different.
We're all different.
We're all unique.
Yes, yes. So any more questions? Comments?
Yeah, actually, just wondering about, about instruments, that a lot of them might have a decent piano or a piano when they start with a keyboard or whatever. It's always one that comes up because a lot of people aren't going to invest, unless there's a piano in the home, they're not going to invest in buying a piano unless they can see like this progress of something happening. So I have a lot of students who would have a keyboard and we try and encourage them to get a better keyboard, if you can't encourage them to get a piano. So just kind of wondering the advice around that, I suppose, not just in general, and for anybody for the floor to say, like anybody have any ideas of what level would you get to before you kind of say, actually, you really need to get a piano now, like how far do you get to grade 3, do you get to grade 4? You can't even push them much further, I don't think.
I agree with that. But I found that with keyboards, the fact that they're so light, it's such a, you can really hear, it's the same point there with technique, you can hear if there's anything wrong rhythmically, if there's anything wrong from weight, you can hear it on the plastic impact. So the keyboard is actually a good place to start technically, but bringing up, it's a financial investment as well, so you're always a bit trepidatious, making that point.
For those online, our two speakers were from the back, and there's a discussion going on now about students starting on keyboards, or when do you encourage, insist, or whatever, that they get a piano, or, some views on that.
Yeah,
Jimmy?
I always try and emphasize that a keyboard is a totally different instrument to the piano. So if you are studying the piano, you want to learn the piano, you will ultimately need a piano. So, and it sounds silly, but simple things like the resonance from the other strings, you don't get that from people. You don't get the feedback from the touch. Some keyboards are better than others, some have weighted keys, and if there's somebody who's maybe curious about learning the piano, it may be something that they can explore for a little while. But in my own practice, I would always insist that, I'm sympathetic totally to the costs of these things, but I would insist that they ultimately, if they're serious about it, that they get an actual piano. And maybe a grace period of the first year for people. But it is very difficult. And then there's this issue of access to education, and it's something that I sympathize with, but I think it's really important to have a piano.
I when people come to me first, if they're beginners, and they ask me what instrument to get, which I find happens most of the time, and they're not in a position to either have space for a piano, or like it's a money thing, or maybe they're just trying it out, I will always say, get something with 88 keys that's weighted. Those are my two things. So their first instrument will at least have that as a base, because I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but sometimes you get children especially come in, someone's given them a little keyboard for Christmas, and they come in and they find middle C, it could be anywhere, middle C, on the piano, because their piano is nothing like mine, they have no sense of the instrument really. So those are my kind of two guidelines.
The touch sensitive.
Yeah. Like that's the two things. If they don't have that, then they're not really going to progress. But people do seem to be open, I find, to your recommendations.
There's just a final comment about repertoire here from Barbara Dyke about boys. The Christopher Norton Microjazz series, she says it's excellent for boys, especially for boys. Gives them repertoire with street cred, she says.
Street cred.
Yes.
They all want the street cred. That's been very interesting. Thank you all, and thank you very much, Tim. And now we welcome David Vesey, who will speak on piano competitions and exams as frameworks for teaching.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to Owen and Siobhan and all of the organising committee for this. Is a really wonderful event and a great opportunity to be able to hear the thoughts of other piano teachers. So I'm going to speak on the topic of piano exams and competitions. At some stage in any pianist's life or journey, for most pianists, they will engage in one or both of these systems, either an exam or a competition. And I suppose understanding how those fit into our teaching practice is a fundamental part of any piano teacher. So in the case of Ireland, I'm going to focus specifically on the Royal Irish Academy of Music local centre exams and the Fesey piano competitions, although a lot of what I'm going to say can equally apply to the ABRSM exams or the various other competitions that run in the country. As I said, most pianists at some stage in their lives will undertake an exam or a competition. The reasons why a pianist would undertake such an exam or competition. In 1973, Charles Braswell, in his book, or in a chapter entitled Contests and Festivals for the Young Pianist, he listed 6 reasons why a pianist would enter such a competition. These being motivation, goal setting, performance experience, communication, both with other participants, but also artistically, systematic musical growth, and then also for teacher improvement, so for the teacher to engage with other teachers and to communicate. Taking the first of these, motivation. Motivation is one of the key reasons that's cited for a young musician to undertake an exam or a competition. And motivation can be broken down into 2 separate strands. So there's extrinsic motivation, which is goal-orientated motivation. So for example, preparing towards an exam or a competition. This is where the goal itself is the end point of the learning. So an exam or a competition is seen as the culmination, I suppose, of the student's learning for the course of a year. And then there's intrinsically motivated learning, where the student is motivated perhaps by the love of the music more so, and is not doing it necessarily with an end goal in mind. Interestingly, in the Irish case, both the Festival and the Royal Irish Academy of Music Local Centre exams were set up in the same decade, the 1890s, with the first Royal Irish Academy of Music exams held in 1892, with only 73 candidates, and the first Festival being held in 1897. By 2022, so only 2 years ago, this had risen to 18,000 entrants in the local centre exams, and over 500 entrants in the Festival piano competitions, which is a remarkable growth over the course of the century. So one of the, I suppose, drawbacks I would see in my own teaching and from speaking to other teachers with regards to both competitions and exams is a sort of narrowing of the repertoire that can take place, where students can focus on, let's say, for example, 3 pieces over the course of months or perhaps even an entire year. One quote that Mark Tanner describes this in his book, The Mindful Pianist. If a pianist has only clocked up a total of 24 pieces in their playing history, i.e. 3 for each grade, then one might well question the overarching learning philosophy. Another quote from 1982 by Eileen T. Klein was referenced, I suppose, the motivations behind students competing in exams or competitions. Recently, an artist commented to me in dismay about the change seen in his studio in the past 6 to 8 years. Students working not so much for the love of music as for showing what they could do, often in preparation for some competition. So for myself, I think viewing competitions and exams as part of an overarching learning philosophy, where they're not seen necessarily as the culmination of a student's journey, but as sort of a benchmark along the way, and perhaps a mini goal that they can set is really important. Some recommendations I would give to piano teachers: I would very much recommend communication with parents being a fundamental part of asking why is the student entering a piano competition? Why are they entering an exam? What are their goals for their piano music? Do they want to pursue perhaps piano at 3rd level, or are they simply doing it as a hobby that they very much enjoy? This can really inform the teacher's approach, I suppose. Other aspects, I think there's a divide between rural Ireland and urban Ireland when it comes to piano teaching as well. I myself come from rural Ireland, and I noticed that the majority of the teachers in my local area at home would have taught towards let's say the Royal Irish Academy of Music local centre exams, as opposed to being, let's say, competition driven. Another aspect to this, which June Armstrong raised in one of her lectures here as part of an EPTA past event, was those who choose to do neither piano exams or competitions, who choose to partake in friendly festivals or student-led or teacher-led recitals, for example, a Christmas concert or a summer concert. And this can be a fun way of a less competitive aspect to piano, while also still giving students a mini goal or something to aim for. So I'll just finish and say that while exams and competitions can be very, very useful to a student, I would tend to view them as part of an overarching learning philosophy, and really my interest for any student is their musical journey over the course of a lifetime. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So, any comments or questions from our audience? In-house or online? Jim?
Before coming to anything else, thanks, David. That was very thought-provoking. I think from my own perspective, it's important to have a blend, as you suggested yourself, between examinations as motivating things and competitions as well, in addition to these other performances that you mentioned at the very end there. And we can get into this cycle of examination, competition, year after year. But then I think that you are in dangerous territory with the students' motivation themselves. As they get older, the extrinsic motivation is less effective. So I think you have to foster that through other performance opportunities as well, where they see it as more of a concert or something. Because I think when you play in a competition, it's a very different feeling, maybe not quite as nice of a feeling as when it's in a competition. Those would be my 2 cents.
I very much agree, and I also think it can not be really a creative endeavour entering in competitions or exams. As I said, there's the limitation on the repertoire, but also artistically, I mean, there's set repertoire that you have to learn. Let's say, for example, you have to learn your sonata, you have to learn, let's say, I don't know, a Beethoven sonata or a Haydn sonata. Or for some competitions, for example, in the FET, there's a set repertoire. For the Royal Irish Academy of Music exams, there's a set program list that you're to choose from. Therefore, the student can't really deviate from that in some aspects, and they're less incentivized to explore the wider repertoire of piano music. For example, contemporary music, which you raised yourself earlier on. So that's a really one aspect, I suppose, that we all need to bear in mind. And I suppose even those who set the repertoire for both competitions and exams can have a huge influence on the repertoire that students will learn over the course of a year.
True.
A nice way to approach it, I think, as well, is if you kind of choose to do the things based on the repertoire rather than choose to do the things and then the repertoire is secondary. So like I had a student who, we had sort of done the odd exam. We didn't go through all the grades, but every year when the pieces would come out, we'd listen to them. And if she really liked 3, well then great, we'll learn them and then sure you can do it. But if you don't like them, well, we're not going to spend 6 months learning music you don't like for the sake of a certificate, So that really kind of, with older students, that kind of started with me, where I thought, well, because I knew that they would want to do an exam, they had expressed that. But I don't know that you should play music that you don't really connect with for the sake of an exam. And then equally, it's a great deadline for things. So.
And how did you find the motivation then, which was one of the things that David spoke about, and the goal? Did you have concerts and things?
Yeah, so actually with that particular student, then I set up duets instead, because then the motivation has to come because if the other person has done the work, you haven't done the work. So I took the opportunity that year to do duets instead, as a kind of motivator. And also just to keep it interesting. I think that's a real challenge as well for pianists, where all of our performance opportunities tend to be mostly solo.
And it's a very lonely thing as well.
Yeah.
Onto what you're saying. The piano is a lonely instrument. We spend so much time alone. There's a social aspect that is missing there with, for example, a flute player will get a chance to play in an orchestra, hopefully, or a violinist. Whereas for piano, we sort of spend so much time practicing on our own, and particularly for young kids, that's a really big thing. So duets are a great way for that, and chamber music in any aspect. It can be very difficult, I suppose, from my own background from rural Ireland, meeting players to play with, or unless you're part of maybe a local music school that might have that. But it can be very difficult. But I think that's a very important aspect. Yes.
There's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
Just a quick point here from June Armstrong. She said what she was talking about was the importance of performance, in that talk that you mentioned. Remember, she mentioned about her students, I think, performing in different concerts.
I think so. Yeah, I think
this is what she just says here online. Yeah, she's just online. So
I think she mentioned something about exams, and I remember she mentioned she pulled out a word being motivation. as which she'd used at a lecture at the Royal Irish Academy 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, she just says the importance of performance, which doesn't necessarily take place within the exam environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, June.
David, a quick question. So the way I currently do it, which I'm not sure is correct, I have a handful of quite strong students, and doing a grade is almost like kind of halts their development because they have to work on that. But then at the same time, their parents are kind of like, oh, our friends keep asking what grade she is, and we can always say she's like, she hasn't done any grades, but she's playing grade whatever pieces. So what I've done with my students is do your grade 5. Obviously they'll be playing pieces that are already grade 8 or whatever, and they would be getting distinctions in grade 5 easy. So do the grade 5, wait, and then when the time comes, do the grade 8. So that's the way we're doing it. I don't think we miss anything in terms of the theory and the pieces and the scales. Sight reading as well, because we are using the time to work on new pieces, but I'm not sure if that's the correct way. So
well, that sounds like a good way. I mean, communicating with parents, as I said, every student is going to have a different journey, so communicating with parents is the key thing. My thoughts with it are you're differentiating between a depth of repertoire, so narrow but very strong. Let's say, for example, you've got your Prokofiev sonata to a really high standard, or something like that. Whereas there's a difference between depth and breadth. So having a wider repertoire, let's say. Now, we need to weigh this up and balance which is more important, and it will vary from student to student. So some students will just want to have a really narrow but really, really strong repertoire. They can play their Chopin nocturnes or whatever, very, very well. But like for other students, they might want a broader repertoire, perhaps of less challenging pieces.